I'm Amy Guittard, and I'm a chocolate expert. I could eat the whole thing. Baking chips, otherwise known as chocolate chips, which if you're a home baker, you're probably super familiar with these. Right out the gate, they both look pretty similar. Not too much of a color difference. They both have nice little tails, which is what we call the tip of the baking chip. So this one has a little bit of a white note to it. It's called bloom. It looks kind of like a white powder. Some people might think it's mold. If the chocolate is in a hot environment and then it cools down in a not proper temperature, it'll get bloom. So since these look so similar, let's move into tasting. So first I'm gonna try this guy over here. So this is a little bit sweeter. The grind itself is a little bit coarser. The first thing I'm tasting is not chocolate, it's sugar. So when you're making chocolate, first you take your beans and you roast them. After roasting, you grind them up and make cocoa liquor or unsweetened chocolate. Much the same way that one would make peanut butter from peanuts. You grind your peanuts to make your peanut butter. You grind your cocoa nibs to get your unsweetened chocolate. If you're refining on a shorter period of time, your grain or your particle size is going to be larger, which means that the fat that's being released in the mass itself is going to have larger globules for it to cover. So when it's on your tongue, it's not going to melt as fluidly as if it were smaller particle sizes with more cocoa butter covering them. So in the case of this particular chocolate, I'm tasting more sugar, which means that not only is the mass have a higher content of sugar, but I'm guessing that maybe in the refining stage, they didn't refine it as finely as another brand might. Sugar is probably the cheapest ingredient that you'd be adding. So if a company is making a ton of chocolate chips and just pumping them out the door, they might be using more of the cheaper ingredient and trying to cut down their production time, which would be in the refining stage, for instance, which is why you're gonna have something that's a little bit more sugary and a little bit larger particle size. So now I'm gonna go ahead and taste B. So this chocolate, when I first taste it, it's a really nice, rich chocolate note. It lingers a little bit longer on my tongue. I'm tasting sugar, much like I tasted this, but it's certainly not the first thing I'm tasting. And also as I eat this chocolate, it melts really evenly on my tongue. I'm not tasting a lot of particle size in it. This is a nice, standard, rounded, beautifully flavored cookie drop. I could eat the whole thing. I think B probably has been refined a little bit more. I'm thinking it probably has less sugar in it than A. And I'm thinking the origins that they're using are a little bit different than A as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and guess that I think B is probably the more expensive one, but let's do the big reveal. Oh, it is. But just by a little bit, huh? The shape is the same. This has white on it, but I don't think that it's due to bloom. It might be due to just scuffing and transportation. This particular chocolate is very sugar forward, and the grains in the chocolate as it melts on my tongue are really prominent. So for your bang for your buck, you're getting a whole lot more flavor for just $1 more in these guys than you are for these guys. So it looks like we've got some milk chocolate here, and I can figure that out just by the color. And just off the bat, taking a look at them, the color is pretty similar. This is a little bit lighter brown. This is a little bit of a darker brown. But what I'm noticing more, other than the color, is just the texture that you have in the chocolate itself. In the case of this one, you can tell that the particle size is a little bit larger. And so when you break it and you've got that rough edge, that to me is a clear sign that there might be a lesser quality milk chocolate happening here. Typically, with a milk chocolate, you can have dark milks or you can have lighter milks. So just in looking at these, one might think that just because it's darker, it might have more cocoa in it, but the only way to find out is to taste it. So let's start with A. Sometimes with chocolate, you have to let it melt on your mouth. So what I'm tasting with this, it's just a really bright, fresh dairy note. With milk chocolate, you're not necessarily looking for chocolate flavor, you're really looking for milk flavor that complements chocolate. So in this case, it's a really upfront, fresh dairy note. The chocolate flavor is there. It's a nice, clean palate. It lingers quite nicely on my tongue as I let it melt. And this is a really nice, even melt as well. Now let's try B. Gosh, this is so soft. So This is super, almost like metallic-y. I don't really get chocolate. I don't really get milk. I get a really sort of burned in the back of my throat flavor. So my guess here is that the dairy that's being used in this might be coming from a higher quality dairy farm versus the dairy that's being used in this. This could very well be grass-fed dairy versus this, although sometimes that really affects the flavor, sometimes it doesn't. This might be a happier cow than this guy. So I'm guessing that with B, the processing has probably been shortened a little bit. Maybe the refining process wasn't as laborious or thoughtful as it was in A, but let's do the big reveal. As suspected, A definitely is the more expensive. With B, the particle sizes again are quite large, which makes it a little bit difficult to melt evenly on my tongue, and it's also impacting the total fat that's in the product and how it melts on my tongue, which is giving again that waxy note, which is all a product of how it's being manufactured or produced in factory. My biggest hunch about this significant price difference is not only the quality of dairy that's being used, but also the time that's going into manufacture this. Something with this level of graininess and sort of lack of depth just in the general delivery of milk and chocolate leads me to believe that it's probably more of a commodity, that they're just pumping out large volumes of this particular chocolate as opposed to this. This is really an art and a science that's being delivered here. In the case that maybe you're doing a lot of volume, say with s'mores, I would maybe consider going with the cheaper version, but in most cases, you're really going to be able to tell the difference from a really high quality milk chocolate versus a lower quality, cheaper milk chocolate. So if you can handle the price difference, I would always say to go with the more expensive one. Okay, so we've got white chocolate, the elusive white chocolate. Well, first of all, you can't call white chocolate with the word chocolate in it unless it has 20% minimum cocoa butter. What does someone maybe replace the cocoa butter with? Something that's probably cheaper, which is oftentimes like a vegetable fat. These are both white products. Whether they're both white chocolate, we'll soon find out. This is an even white color. This is more of a yellowish color, which leads me to believe that it might be more natural. So when you think chocolate, you think brown, and that brown is coming from the solids that are in the unsweetened chocolate. With white chocolate, it's white because it doesn't have any of the cocoa solids in it. It's just made up of cocoa butter, which without the solids is clear. This particular product over here is so bright white that it might have an additive added to it to even out the color and drop out any off colors that one might not want in their end product. So now it's time to taste. I'm gonna actually start with this one over here, just because I think it looks tastier. Why not? So, as suspected, it is melting quite evenly on my tongue. Fun fact, cocoa butter melts at your body's temperature. So this particular product is melting quite quickly. I can taste some sugar, but for the most part, it's a really fresh dairy note. It has a little bit of citrus to it, and it's a really creamy mouthfeel, and it's really clean. Moving on to B, let me taste this one now. I'm a little scared because it looks a little bright white. It's always scary when it comes to food. This is not melting as easily and fluidly as this one, which makes me think that this probably is not a white chocolate. I'm thinking this probably has a fair amount of vegetable fat in it, alternatively to the cocoa butter. So I'm thinking this is probably a compound. I also think that this has a fair amount of vanilla added into it. That's pretty much all I'm tasting is vanilla and sugar when I taste this guy. And again, the most important sort of cue to me when I'm tasting this is that it's not melting evenly. It's really sticky and waxy on my mouth and the roof of my mouth. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that this is probably a compound. This is probably a white chocolate. And I'm gonna say that this is probably significantly more expensive than this one. Okay, big reveal. Aha. So This, as suspected, is a bit more pricey than this one. If you don't have 20% minimum cocoa butter in your final product, you can't call it chocolate. And most of the time, if something is a pure chocolate, it's got a little bit of a yellower hue to it. If you add vegetable fat in, you're replacing the cocoa butter with something that is more stable, might not require tempering. As I thought, this probably has a significant amount of sugar in it compared to this, which has some cocoa butter in it, some sugar, and just a really beautifully made white chocolate. Okay, so it looks like we've got some cocoa powders here. I guess first things that I notice about these guys is that they look like they're natural cocoa powders. I say that because most of them are they're both a little bit on the lighter side. If something's Dutched, which means adding sodium bicarbonate, it's a Dutching agent, which makes the cocoa powder turn a little bit darker. I'm also noticing that this one over here is slightly darker than this one here. If they're already natural cocoa powders, they tend to have more moisture in them. The moisture tends to make the cocoa powder a little bit darker. Cocoa powder is made by taking unsweetened chocolate and putting it in a hydraulic press and pressing it with so much pressure that you're separating your cocoa powder from your cocoa butter. So you have your solids and your fats. They're both sort of light and fluffy. They've got some grain to them. But I guess the next step for me to figure out which one is better is if I taste them.
I'll take a little bit so it doesn't go over everywhere.
Tasting powder is a little bit tricky. So the first thing I notice when I taste this one is that it's really quite burned. So that means that they were probably roasting the liquor quite high before they made the cocoa powders. The other thing that I notice is that the flavor profile on my tongue doesn't linger. It sort of hits my tongue and then the chocolate flavor stops. Okay, now I'm gonna try this other one. I don't know why I can't do this without smiling. When I taste this one, the first thing I'm tasting, it's a nice rounded, deep chocolate note. It's not burned. It's a really sort of light, fresh, it's still chocolatey and you can still taste that it's been roasted, but it's definitely not a high roasted liquor that's probably being used in this. I'm also noticing that the flavor, once it hits my tongue, lasts a little bit longer. It lingers a little bit more. And that's a sign of a higher quality cocoa powder as well. When you're trying to select which cocoa powder to use, you want to make sure that it's got full flavor, full chocolate flavor, as well as a nice long lingering flavor profile. I'm gonna go ahead and say that B is probably the more expensive of the two. Let's reveal. Yep, B it is. So this one's definitely obviously more expensive. I didn't think that it was gonna be that much more expensive, but I think some of the things that might be happening here is it could very well be an organic cocoa powder. It might have some certifications on it as well, like Fair Trade or Rainforest Alliance certified. The really important part is that it's delivering a really strong chocolate flavor. With Dutched cocoa powders, you're oftentimes getting more of a cocoa flavor, a cooked, salty flavor in A. The flavor profile of the chocolate isn't super chocolatey, it's more burned than chocolate. But there's definitely some uniqueness going on here that's lacking in this one, which is probably where the price difference is coming from. Okay, so it looks like we have a super dark chocolate here, a chocolate bar. The other thing that I'm noticing with this as well is this one over here on B has a fair amount of air bubbles in it. The air bubbles don't necessarily affect the quality of the chocolate, but it definitely impacts my perception of the quality of the chocolate. So in this case, with the air bubbles there, it makes me think that maybe there was something that was lacking in the way that it was processed, or the attention to detail that went into making this chocolate. So let me go ahead and taste this one. So I'm guessing it's probably in the 80% range. I knew it was a dark chocolate by the color of it, but it's definitely a really deep, rich, dark chocolate. There's not a lot going on in terms of complexity. There's a little astringency at the end of it, but the flavor, the deep chocolate flavor notes is really coming up front, and then it lingers throughout as I'm finishing eating it. So this definitely tastes like something that I could eat a lot of. We call that moreish, where you just want more of it. If it's not something that you can eat a lot of, it might be a single origin. We call that sipping chocolate, where you might just want a little bit and you're satisfied. You can't have too much of it. Now I'm gonna go ahead and try this one, B. So this is very different from this one. It's a little bit more extreme. It's not a really rounded flavor profile. I think it's probably a single origin. I definitely wouldn't be able to have a lot of this. So when I taste both of these, they both melt rather evenly on my tongue. There's not a significant difference in terms of particle size like we were commenting on earlier. The main difference is just flavor development on my palate when I eat them. My guess is that B is probably more expensive, but I really have no idea. So I guess let's take a look and see what the difference is. Oh my goodness. Does that say $550 a bar? I thought there would be a difference, but I didn't think it would be this much. This is surprising. I didn't even know there was a bar that was $550. Maybe they have a direct relationship with the farm. There might be a component, like an heirloom cacao component to this. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think the air bubbles necessarily affect the quality, but it definitely gives an appearance of a lower quality chocolate bar. I might just want a really delicious chocolate bar that I can eat in 1 or 2 or 10 bites. I might want this for a special occasion where I'm pairing it with something at a dinner party. I don't know if I would pay that much personally. Don't forget, this is still a $7 chocolate bar, which isn't a cheap chocolate bar from the grocery store. It's still a really high quality chocolate. But you know, the big takeaway here is that you don't have to spend an arm and a leg to buy a really good bar of chocolate. There's a time and a place for when you would want to buy an expensive chocolate bar, whether it's $7 or in some cases, what is it? $550. So I'm hoping the big takeaway from today is that price isn't everything, that it's really important to taste the chocolate that you are choosing between. If you want to go with an 89-cent chocolate bar, great, if that satisfies your craving. If you want to spend $550 on a single origin chocolate, perfect. Hopefully you learned something here that will make it easier when you're at the store trying to make some decisions around what chocolate to buy.